We've talked quite a bit about some of the challenges with implementing morality in games. The limitations of the medium combined with the interaction with the player can and often does lead to a limited experience in games. But as always, this is only part of the picture. Today we'll take a deeper dive into morality itself. Specifically, we'll look at aspects of good and how those aspects of good often fail to translate into video game form. And we will probably cover this over the course of a few videos, so buckle up. In one of my previous videos, I gave a sort of hand-wavy definition of morality. For this video, I'm going to invoke what is commonly called the golden rule for the purposes of this discussion. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, 2 quick notes before we move on. I call them Note 1 and Note 2, and I've been reading way too much Dr. Seuss. First, I would like to state that the golden rule itself gives no indication what is good and what isn't. All that the rule states is that whatever one considers to be good should be done to another. This is obviously problematic in and of itself, but for the purposes of reciprocity, it will do. Secondly, I don't necessarily subscribe to the golden rule as stated. In fact, I think the teachings of Jesus speak to a more profound truth that is even more golden rule-like than the actual golden rule. But again, the rule is sufficient for the purposes of this discussion. So let's talk a little bit about some generally good actions. Let's start with going to see a friend. You may schedule a time or do it on the fly, head down to a meeting place, and spend time with that person. All in all, good times being had. Let's take another example, such as volunteering at a food pantry. You have to get up, usually at some unholy hour on a weekend, head down, lift heavy boxes, and distribute food all for free. No, I'm not grumbling. I have a reason for focusing on this. Finally, consider something a bit more work, like, parenting. From sunup to sundown and after, you are charged with caring for one or more tiny persons. It requires constant care and patience that doesn't become apparent until you're square in the middle of it. All of these things are good things. They are actions that I think anyone could define as good. They are also actions of varying demands on oneself. More particularly, they all have the concept of sacrifice. Sacrifice is, at its heart, the notion of surrendering oneself to another in some form. In the visit to a friend, you surrender some of your time. In the food pantry, time and effort are surrendered to those in need. In parenting, you surrender time, energy, cash, sleep, and possibly your sanity. Yes, it's been a long few weeks, so sue me. The golden rule implies a sacrifice that must be held to. The notion that people should limit their actions directed at another to that which conforms to what you would want them to do to you. By conforming to the golden rule, you surrender the possibility of taking actions that do not conform to that rule. The concept of sacrifice lies at the heart of good. Regardless of the object of what that sacrifice is directed toward, the idea of choosing to do good often entails giving up or yielding something to another. Sacrificing and good are more often than not 2 sides of the same coin. It's no wonder then that several major philosophical and religious ideas revolve around the notion of sacrifice. For Christianity, sacrifice lies at the heart of the salvific act of the cross. But even if one only subscribes to the golden rule as a maxim, sacrifice forms a core element of that moral concept. This sacrifice can also be painful at times. In my examples above, there are levels of effort needed to accomplish those good actions. Sometimes that sacrifice is negligible, say in the case of visiting a friend, because the reward is much greater than the sacrifice. Other times, knowing you did the right thing may be the only comfort one has for good actions that require a tremendous amount of sacrifice. So that blah 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 is all well and good, but what does this have to do with video games? Well, it actually has a lot to do with sacrifice. Namely, there are several aspects of the concept of sacrifice that simply don't make it into games. For starters, there's no object of sacrifice. That's object of sacrifice, not sacrificial object. That is, there is no person or thing that which the sacrifice is directed toward. Part of the dissatisfaction with video game good is that real sacrifice for another is required for good to happen. Now, this is also true that there's no object in other media such as movies or books. But the thing is that games are the only medium where the consumer has to direct things and do things. A sacrifice made by an on-screen character you have no control over makes you an observer. In games, the player must direct the action to sacrifice, but without the actual sacrifice. Finally, the biggest issue is that there is no you, or rather, you are not the character in the game. Thus, you aren't really sacrificing in any real sense, yet the game makes you undertake simulated actions. This causes a real disconnect between what the player experiences and what the in-game avatar experiences. The character might undergo a great deal of sacrifice in the game narrative, but at the end of the day, we are simply modeling or watching said character undergo that suffering, not experiencing it ourselves. This observation status we are reduced to here goes against the moral nature of good, namely that rather than participate in good, we are reduced to observing the effects of simulated actions in games. This removes some of the investment and involvement in the morally good actions that the avatar performs. It also goes against game design and immersion. When an avatar character has to undergo some suffering or some loss that is a result of the sacrifice that the player has made, that introduces an aspect of disconnect from the avatar. The The avatar is experiencing something the player is not experiencing in some fashion. Games, by their nature, attempt to merge actions the player can take with the consequences of those actions. This inability to give of oneself is a drastic limitation of modeling morality and the experience of trying to do good. It robs good actions of a fundamental element necessary to make those actions feel authentic. It makes doing good feel, wait for it, lame. Title, roll credits. So now you are eagerly anticipating what my solution is to this problem. Well, unfortunately there really isn't one. The very nature of sacrifice and the need for an actual object for the benefit of that sacrifice require that object to be, real. So by definition, simulations, such as video games, sadly will not be able to get to the point of actually implementing sacrifice. Now, that isn't to say there aren't ways of addressing this issue, but that is a discussion for a future video. Here's a teaser though. Consider how I said that other media have the same issue. Ponder how such media actually substitute for that defect. That's all for now. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thanks for watching my video to the end. If you like more of this, you can click on the subscribe link at the bottom, and as you can see, there are a couple of other videos that you can click on as well. One of them is one of my prior reviews or another content video, and the other one is going to be a playthrough that I'm doing. So feel free to click on either one. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks very much.